Today's episode is sponsored by Learning Blade. Middle school is the ideal time for career exploration. With Learning Blade, you can easily integrate STEM and career awareness concepts into your classroom. Find out if this resource is free in your state at learningblade.com. Thanks, Learning Blade. Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of ed tech.
Today, we're talking to Tony Perry, Assistant Professor in STEM Education at the University of North Dakota. Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you all.
This works. We are so excited. So we always start out our podcast kind of the same way, asking you about your journey in education and how you ended up kind of doing what you're doing now, the path that you took to get there.
Yeah. My journey, like many educators, is a winding path. So I went to get my undergraduate degree in astronomy and physics. And I knew that I loved science. I loved doing a lot of hands-on projects outside of school that my appetite was not sort of fulfilled through a physics degree. And I wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to do after graduation. Applied to a bunch of jobs, and the first place to say yes was the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
So my very first job, I drove 150 miles down the road from Madison, Wisconsin, and I was giving tours on a rescued World War II U-boat that was captured during World War II. I don't know if anybody has been there. It's very cool. The U-505, it's still there today.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And I really enjoyed talking about science, being around science and technology, and connecting with the public around my passions. So that was great. Started there, worked my way up at the museum for a couple years, and working in Chicago and living in Chicago, I started to think a lot about who has access to these super exciting places of learning like a museum. And I love my museum educators. I love my museum education experience. Let me preface that. I think they're wonderful places, but our large, museums, it costs so much money to get there, to bring a family, to park, and then eat while you're there. I wasn't sure that I was having the impact that I felt like I could have working in public programming. So I shifted gears, moved in to be a classroom teacher, a high school science teacher in Chicago public schools, and just sort of started the next step of my journey as I started with a brand new school model where we were partnered with IBM, as they have this model called P-Tech. And the idea is that it's an early college STEM school. So all of our students were accelerating in math and science. All of our students were connecting with and preparing for the kinds of high demand, high pay occupations that places like IBM have, huge openings in lots of IT fields, for example. And it's really a blended model that really connected students and gave some context and coherence to our curriculum. How does physics or English or PE connect with IT, right? Everything really comes together, and it's a coherent high school day. So that was a ton of fun. Did that for a couple of years, and then I ended up moving across the country to Boston to take a job at MIT in one of the coolest job titles that people can have in invention education. So
cool.
I took what I learned from the museum, from working at the high school, and we ran a national grants program where we provided grants of up to $10,000 for teams of high school students across the country to conceptualize, design, and build their own inventions. So
Oh,
students would
cool.
identify an issue in their backyard, and
Mhm.
then they would use the grant to go from good idea to actual working prototype over the course of a school year.
Oh,
And
cool.
um, then they would all come to MIT at the end of the year. They would meet other inventors from across the country. They would showcase their inventions, get become a part of the MIT community. That was a real blast.
Did the funding go away for that, or does that still exist?
The program still exists. It's called
Okay.
the Lemelson MIT program.
Okay.
You can look it up. Um, and The Lemelson Foundation was started by Jerry Lemelson, who was a prolific inventor and really wanted to inspire the next generation of inventors. So we were
Oh,
funded
cool.
through that foundation. They continue to be funded and continue to grow the Invention Education Network. Um,
Okay.
while I was doing that work, again, this is all corners of the United States. I got to travel a lot, so I got to see what education looks like in a lot of different contexts, from you know my experience in Chicago to New York City public schools to small rural communities and everything in between. Um, that was a really great place for me to learn a lot, to see what really connects and engages students, and also to think about the systems and structures that support our teachers and students to have these kind of really big capstone types of experiences. What kind of supports do you need to make something like that happen? That is a big lift to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I have such great love and respect for what our classroom teachers do and their work day to day. And sometimes our systems um, aren't doing great to support them. So I
Yeah.
started asking questions that directed me towards doing some research, enrolling in a PhD program. Um, so I did my doctoral studies looking at some of these systems and structures. How do we support students? How do we create more of these learning opportunities? I loved working with 15 or so communities each school year, but right, there are tens of thousands of high schools across the
Yes.
country, right. If
Yeah.
we really want to make a difference, we've got to think for, a little bit bigger. In order to make a change. So that led me to my doctoral studies, um, and that really convinced me that you know I can make a difference, um, the best that I can through scholarship, and then through being in academia to support students, undergraduate students and graduate students. So that's kind of my long winding path. So about 15 years as a practitioner, and now I'm in my second year here as assistant professor at the University of North Dakota.
Wow. That's pretty wild. That's pretty wild, but I also appreciate the fact that you've had the opportunity to, have experience in all different types of school settings, like, because it's definitely valuable, especially for your perspective. And how
Yeah.
did you get involved with STEM education? I mean,
It's like a
your
natural
path makes
progression or
sense,
yeah.
yes, to
Y
STEM, but how did you kind of land in that realm, I guess, and specifically surrounding partnerships?
Sure. So part of it was again having those lived experiences out there in the world. So um, wh- when um, when I was doing that work um, with IBM, seeing the value that one that my students saw when we would bring mentors to the school. So working professionals,
Mm,
um, our students were excited, right? Maybe they weren't, like, oh, I want to have career X that this person has, but they're like, wow, an adult is excited about who I am and what I do, and they're not my teacher and they're not my parents. That's really
mhm.
cool. That's really motivating and
yeah.
engaging to students, to see um, the mentors who are maybe like a little, they're coming from industry, they're not trained as educators, they're maybe a little timid. Um, but to see when you put them in the right environments, they light up too. They see what our young people are capable of, what classroom teachers and
Yeah.
people who work in schools every day see and know about our students. We can teach the community, like, we've got something special here that we need to support and we need to nurture. And then as I left the classroom and did that work in invention education, um, every single project relied on local community experts. Whether that was
Oh.
somebody who had technical skills, maybe it was their occupation, maybe it was their hobby. They
Mm,
relied on people who can contribute in lots of different ways, right? We asked the students to travel to MIT from wherever they are, and that isn't cheap. So people would step up
Right.
and contribute through fundraising or supporting media outreach. It really takes a village
yeah.
to do this work, and when the village comes together around the needs of our young people, they set aside whatever differences they may have. They figure out how to work together, and something that a school alone or an external partner alone could never do. They really have, the way I like to describe it, as complementary skill sets and assets that they bring to the table. And it's really it's more than additive. It's, the whole is
Mhm.
greater than the sum of the parts kind of situation.
So, how can schools create meaningful partnerships?
Yeah, yeah. So that's like the most exciting question to me, both as a researcher, but also when I'm talking to folks, working in schools all the time, right? How do we do this work? That's part of what motivates me, because we can point to, right, like for example, that IBM model, and we can think of all the
Mhm.
reasons why we can't. Okay, well, in Chicago, we have large businesses. Maybe we don't have that in our community. IBM can donate all of this money. Well, maybe we only have small or medium sized businesses. They can't, get a bus of 200 employees and bring them to a high school, right? I get
Yeah.
those are real concerns and real constraints. So, um, what I have learned about how to get started is to start small and look for opportunities to bring together students and outside mentors. Um, that is really the magic moment. When I talk with um, some folks, there's uh, somebody that I've interviewed, and he describes it as like that's the start of organic growth. You start to develop trust with each other. Um, Students trust the mentors, mentors trust the students. That's really essential. But then when we think about our teachers, one of the teachers told me when she was first starting this work that she was terrified to have her students put their work on public display. And I get it. She said, my students' successes are their successes, but their failures are my failures. So when we put it out there, it's as much about putting ourselves as classroom teachers out there, and that's a scary thing, and that's a real thing that is not built into part of our regular practices. So the more we can create those little moments to bring people together, whether it's, hey, my students did a project, come and see, just come and see.
Mhm.
um, Tell me what you think, tell them what you think. Little moments like that, and then
Yeah.
that can start to snowball and build trust throughout. And then when you're excited about it, like, invite the principal, hey, come check out what my students are doing, and check out what, talk to their mentor. And then they
Mm,
start to have some conversations, and then maybe, the principal starts to talk with, somebody else at the business and say, oh, like, thanks so much for sending your employees over, one evening. It really meant a lot to our kids. Maybe the business doesn't even know, because one employee came out of the goodness of their heart. you know,
Yeah.
and then these bigger things start to happen. So it's a long road, but if you start with short, deliberate youth adult interactions, you can really build the trust that these kinds of systems need to flourish.
Can you share an example of a partnership that's had significant or positive impact that you've seen just like within your either your research or just what you've been involved with?
Yeah, yeah. From a research perspective, this is something that I've written a little bit about, and there's more coming soon. But I think about a school near you in Akron, Ohio, where the one of the STEM schools there is partnered with Goodyear. Goodyear is their sort of large corporate partner. And if you look
Yep.
at it today, you will see again how this really robust system, so many people involved. Um, and it's hard to imagine, well, how did they get to there? Well, it started with those small commitments, that organic growth. Um, it's then that's created a lot of goodwill to the point where um, one of their corporate partners actually loaned an engineer to work with the school so that the teachers had technical expertise on call, whether that was curriculum planning, whether that was working on projects with students, that was in house. What a show of good faith, right? To
Yeah.
to give
Yeah.
those kinds of resources. um, and their system today, they've got all of these district level supports. Their corporate partner Goodyear is the largest. They've got ways to connect with the school, connect people. They'll say, yes, there's some money exchanged, but it's really about the people and the relationships and the connections. And then that's broadened into the broader community where they have, students designing enrichment toys for the zoo, for example. Lots of really fun things happening in the community. And what have they seen as a result? Um, they have really seen the number of students who are graduating kind of with a workforce readiness bent, who are able to.
Mhm.
The state of Ohio has some extra seals you can get on your high school diploma. So their students are among the top who are getting this seal for. I forget the actual name of it, something like
Yeah.
workforce readiness,
Mhm.
Yes.
because they have the external validity from all of their interactions with external adults over their high school career. Um, they have transformed the school day. They have transformed what it's like to teach and learn in that community. Um, and the students are really starting to show the effect. And it was, um, deliberate, and it was over time. This is not
Mhm.
an overnight success, right? These are
Yeah.
5, 10, 20-year journeys in some cases in some of the schools that I've studied. But they all start with those small intentional moments. There's another school in rural upstate New York. When I say rural, there are about 60 students in grades 9 through 12. So this is a very
Oh, wow.
tiny rural community.
Yeah.
Um, and their students are working on authentic projects in the community 2 days a week. So they have sort of 3 days a week of what maybe looks a little bit more like a traditional high school day. 2 days a week they're out in the community doing real projects. What they have seen is high school graduation rates soar because the students are connected and engaged.
Yeah.
um, and this connects back with a lot of what we know from the career and technical education research community. That's sort of my area of expertise. And yes, we're excited about the workforce outcomes. We're excited when students, who take a CTE pathway and then go on and get their first job in that area. But what we see time and time again is that these partnerships um, really engage students in their learning. They get them
Yeah.
connected to something meaningful. And that's the power of these partnerships. And that's what's really allowing youth to flourish. And that's what gets part of what gets me excited about this work.
It makes their learning more meaningful and really authentic.
Yeah.
What's not to love about that? It helps, I guess, stifle that
Mm.
question of like, when am I ever going to use this?
Right.
Yes,
That
that's
sounds
right.
like
Yeah. Well, and
it
I am,
sounds like there's a lot of buy-in from the kids.
yeah.
Yeah. The kids buy in, and again, right, that's what's exciting about this work is that the kids buy in, and when we come into education spaces with that mindset, that's what gets teachers to light up and buy in when their kids buy in. That's what gets,
Mhm.
the systems level administrators to buy in when they can see the students connect. And that's what gets our external partners excited when they see the students.
Yeah.
Those external partners see these students like, as their neighbors' kids, as their children,
Yeah.
as people they see in the grocery store, and then to see them light up is really special.
Teachers, you can now earn contact hours toward grad credit for listening to the podcast.
Visit fortheloveofedtech.org for more information.
Okay, so where in your and maybe this is like your dream world, or it could just be in
Sure.
reality, either way. But what would you say, or I guess, how do you see the role of partnerships in K-12 education kind of evolving over the next 5-10 years?
So, in my little world, the biggest thing that I'm seeing is um, a real interest in work based learning.
Okay.
So
Mm.
we might think of, and most commonly, work based learning is thought of these cumulative experiences at the end of high school where a
Mhm.
student gets an opportunity to go and like have an authentic work experience. Maybe it's for a quarter, a semester, and they get credit. Maybe they also get pay for it. And it's a culminating experience. There's a lot of interest, particularly within the career and technical education world, in developing and in increasing the number of students who have access to work-based learning. So that
Yeah.
to me is kind of the opening to looking and thinking more about work-based learning as a continuum
Okay.
where maybe it starts in younger grades where an industry mentor is coming into a classroom and
Mhm.
giving students advice on a project they're working on. Um, so it starts smaller, lower stakes, and it starts to build up some of the trust with the students, some of the trust with the mentors, and the institutions themselves,
Mhm.
so that more students are ready and excited for work based learning at the end of their high school career. Um, so that's what I see happening
Okay.
um, all across the US. Work based learning is like the new thing. But
Mm.
we're not going to be successful if we're not thinking about it first as developing these mutual partnerships. If we're only looking at the end as this transactional things that happens where my students go to you and you take care of them and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
You can't leave that stuff up to chance. Students maybe have a good experience, a bad experience. Employers maybe have a good experience or a bad experience. And as a result, partnerships aren't sustainable. Um, Students aren't getting what they could out of it. If we're starting by thinking about partnerships, then what will emerge are really meaningful work-based learning experiences across the
Mm.
continuum, including those sort of capstone experiences that maybe are most familiar to us.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like those are so meaningful. Just giving kids exposure to different opportunities and
Yeah.
options for the future.
Yeah.
So students get exposure. They find out what they like. They find out what they
Mhm.
don't like.
Like,
um,
yes.
and in those environments, right? One way we could think of it as that, we want to prepare students all the way along so they can be successful, but maybe being in that authentic environment is what lights the spark for a child,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's their moment where they see, wow, I got to step it up, or they shine in ways that a school environment never allowed them to
True.
shine. So I'm tend to be a little wary of conversations about where, oh, we need to limit work-based learning. There are these concerns, there are those concerns. No, we need to have partnerships throughout so that all of our students have the opportunity to experience sort of the joy and the aha moments that come along with work-based learning.
Yeah.
So are there obstacles to consider when trying to create partnerships? And how can educators and the community leaders work through those?
That's a really important question. So let me start. One of my mentors, he liked to say, "Never let reality stand in the way of what's possible." So,
Mm.
so I like to be optimistic
Yeah.
about what's possible, but I think it's also important to be pragmatic about some of these challenges.
Mhm.
I've hinted at some of them. So just to be really clear, um, there are like just like structural challenges, right? Where mentors can come and work with students is not typically where students can work with mentors. So
Mhm.
there is travel time, travel distance. If your students don't have access to transportation, how do they get out into the community? Um, if you only have these short 30-minute blocks, at odd times during the day, can your industry mentors get to you? Um, so time is a challenge. There's ways and cultures of working, right? If you're in
Mhm.
industry, you might be in a more fast-paced, project-based environment. And if you're a classroom teacher, you might not check your email between 8:30 and 3.
And yeah.
So
Yep.
so a whole lifetime maybe has come for your partners, and you weren't able to participate in that, because you were busy doing what you needed to do to be present with your class and your students.
Yeah.
um, so that's a challenge. There are cultural misconceptions about, uh, in STEM fields, about, engineers or scientists or technologists. There are cultural misconceptions about teachers and teaching. Um, what I'll go back to is what I said at the beginning, is that the way to overcome these barriers is to develop trust, to create
Mhm.
small opportunities to see the magic happen. And when we can do
Yeah.
that, the way we overcome these barriers is going to depend on the local assets in your backyard. But when you start to trust each other and believe in the power of partnerships for your students' sake, you take the time to figure out how to do it. That's been the lesson that I've seen time and time again. So I hear folks all around the country who are excited to be a partner, who are
Mhm.
excited to invite partners in. And what I would encourage you to do is to start with small moments where these external adults can connect with students, and have an eye towards building something robust, but know that it's going to start small and it's going to grow and problem solve over time.
I like that. And I also think that we should touch on the fact that these partnerships don't necessarily have to offer students an opportunity to build X, like, just like, I guess, going back to the zoo enrichment things. That is the coolest project ever. And Sam talks about that on his
Yes. Yeah.
episode, which I think if you want to go back and listen to it was
That's
like
great.
in November, maybe. Um, but it could even be something at like the students are designing like a logo for a local business, or
Mhm.
trying to like solve a problem. So maybe you have like a teeny mom and pop like t-shirt store in town and they're struggling with X, whatever it is, and they don't have time to deal with that because there's only, say, 2 on the staff. That's something they could give to the students to come up with a problem and work through, like, that whole, engineer design process piece, right? I mean, that's kind of
100%.
it
Yep.
doesn't have to be
This doesn't have to be a big production. This doesn't have to
Yeah.
be expensive. It doesn't have to be a groundbreaking project. But right, if you start with that small business, I bet that the
Mhm.
the students, maybe it's a business that they walk by or drive by, or if it's the t-shirt company, maybe some of them wear their t-shirts. They know about it. They're bought in. These are people that they care about, and
Mhm.
a lot of times in smaller communities where it is more small or medium-sized businesses, um, they maybe have those specific tasks. They don't have an HR department that can roll out a big 6-week internship program,
Right.
Yeah.
but they can do something meaningful, and they can also do something tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? um,
Yeah.
and sort of some of the smallness gives a lot of flexibility and autonomy, that maybe can be an advantage too.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I just thought that was, like, kind of important to point out is that too, it you can think about it in all facets of getting involved within the
Mhm.
community. So, you know, no matter, yeah, how big or how small, there's
Yeah.
options.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and then, um, again, my kind of STEM lens is always, we go into
Yes.
the scientists and technologists and engineers, but
Uh-huh.
right, these are full people who have like a wide suite of interests or hobbies or skills or expertise that may have nothing to do with their actual occupation.
Yeah.
So being able to open up doors and connect with folks that way, is really exciting, and helpful too. I want to have the playbook. I want to have the prescription. If you just do X, Y, and
I
Z,
see.
then you're going to have these amazing partnerships. They're going to last forever, and it's going to transform student learning. Um, but I really, just want to come back to the idea that. Um, there are north stars out there that can point us in directions.
Mhm.
That's part of what I've been writing about. Let's think about what's
Mhm.
possible, but knowing what's in your backyard, what are your assets, what are your strengths, and how can you start to connect your own dots. That's how you get to those robust and enduring partnerships. Um, so I'm sorry I don't have the playbook, but I know that there is a
No,
playbook.
it's kinda like,
No,
Uh,
no.
"Here's the build it, and they will come."
yeah, yeah. But there's so much, um, when you start doing this work, your students light up, your educators light up, your external partners light up, and then you start to solve those big, accountability level problems like high school graduation rates or student other post-secondary types of outcomes, and that comes. um, but to get your community connected through these partnerships, um, I think is really worth the investment of your time.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree, and I think it's just, yeah, that this movement or this shift toward this is exciting, really.
Yeah, yeah. I really hope that folks can come into this sort of as these policy winds shift, and we can come
Mhm.
in with an open mind and, really think about what engages our young people. How do they want to get connected, locally and connected to their learning in the classroom? And that
Yeah,
partnerships can be one avenue to explore that really makes that possible.
yeah, I think that's great. Are there any resources you would point teachers to if they, like, really wanna learn more or get
Yeah,
started or
yeah. Um, what I can share a couple of resources. I have some writing that I can share, some case studies of some of those North Stars. I think
Okay.
that might be helpful to imagine what's possible. There are some national organizations that are excited about helping folks get started on this pathway, um,
Okay.
for next generation learning, big picture learning. Um, NAF used to be National Academies Foundation. There are
Okay.
many others um, that are excited about working on the systems level, um, in supporting you on this journey. Um, but really, um, again, it's about starting small. Um, if we're going to change systems, it can feel overwhelming, but there's small things that you can do, and you can do them tomorrow. And that's invite a partner into your classroom, or if you're that partner and you want to get excited, ask a teacher. Are your
Yeah.
students doing any projects? Love to see. Maybe there's some ways we can connect and start there.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much for such a great conversation, Tony.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
my pleasure. And I would love to, if any listeners want to connect and talk more. I'm always looking for other folks that I can share and uplift your work. Or if you're facing some of those obstacles and just want to talk them through, I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And all your, I guess, your contact and stuff will be on our website, like, I guess, with the show notes.
Perfect. That's
So,
wonderful.
yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. And again, get started. Something small. Do it tomorrow.
I love it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. We hope you found our discussion interesting and insightful. Don't forget to check out the show notes on our website, where you'll find more information about today's guest, resources we mentioned, and information on earning contact hours for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with your network, and check us out at fortheloveofedtech.org. This podcast is produced by SOIDA, the Southwestern Ohio Instructional Technology Association, in partnership with Think TV and CET, the local PBS stations in Dayton and Cincinnati. Until next time, keep exploring new ways to empower your students through tech, and we'll catch you in the next episode.